Hello health champions! Today I want to talk about the little things that can make the biggest difference when it comes to losing belly fat and losing weight. And once you understand how they work, then you'll see that maybe they're not such little things after all, and then you can really take it to the next level and get lasting results as well as some nice health bonuses along the way. Perhaps the most important thing you can do is to eat shorter. So I know you've heard you're supposed to eat less, and we'll get to that. And I'm also not talking about eating faster. I'm not talking about rushing through your meals. Eating shorter means that you eat your foods in a shorter time period, in a shorter window of time. And why does that matter? Well, let's say that you have your first meal at 7 a.m. Then as soon as that food hits your taste buds, your insulin goes up. Your body has insulin just standing by, ready to go. And what does insulin do? It is a storage hormone. Its purpose primarily is to take glucose, blood sugar, from the bloodstream and into the cell. And indirectly, therefore, because it's pushing sugar into the cell, it also promotes the conversion of glucose into fat, because your body can only store a tiny amount of glucose as glycogen, and then any excess is going to be turned into fat. We therefore want to think of insulin as a storage hormone, as a fat storing hormone, even though it primarily acts on glucose. And any time that insulin is high, it prevents fat burning. So if you're trying to lose weight, you can't really do that while insulin levels stay high. Now let's say that you have your last meal of the day at 9 p.m. and you have several meals in between. Again, at 9 p.m., as soon as you eat, your insulin goes up a little bit, but it's also going to stay up for a couple of hours until you have digested and processed through that food. So from 7 to 11 or so, your insulin stays mostly elevated, meaning you are mostly in fat storage mode. And if you have those hours for your meals, that means for 16 hours, you're primarily in fat storage. And for only 8 hours, you're primarily in fat burning. So that's why it's so hard to burn fat and lose weight if most of the time you're in a state, in a hormonal state, where your body is storing more than burning. So there, in this example, you would be twice as long in fat storing with elevated insulin as you would be in fat burning. Or 67% of the time fat storing, 33% fat burning. Now let's say that all you do is you skip that last evening meal. You have your last meal is dinner at 5 or 6 o'clock. Now you're basically going to be 12 and 12. You cut 4 hours or so off your feeding time, you extend your fasting time. Now that means you're in a 1-to-1 ratio. Before you were a 2-to-1 ratio, but just skipping one meal already gets you in a 1-to-1 between fat storing and fat burning, or 50% of each. And then as your body gets used to that, you'll find it's pretty easy to also skip breakfast and you eat both your meals within a few hours. Now you have reversed that 2-to-1 ratio. So now you're fasting for 16 hours. You're allowing insulin to drop for a much longer period of time, and you're only in fat storing about 8 hours. So now instead of a 2-to-1, you have a 1-to-2. You have improved the relative ratio fourfold. And let's say you go a little further now and you eat one meal a day. And because that's a little bit bigger meal, it takes you full 4 hours to digest it before insulin comes back down. But now you're in a 1-to-5 ratio. Instead of the 2-to-1 you had, now you have improved the ratio between fat storing and fat burning tenfold. And you're in fat storing 17% and fat burning 83%. So this is much more important in losing weight and burning belly fat than calories alone, because this allows you to get on a steady state of fat burning, and it will stabilize your metabolism and it will stabilize your hunger. And now some people are going to say, I agree with that. That makes perfect sense. But others are going to say, I disagree. I'm not sure that's how it works because I've heard other people say different things. So here's the problem with humans, that we pick and choose. We hear something, we say, yeah, that sounds right, and then we say, no, that doesn't sound right. And that's still okay. But most of that is based on preconceptions, that we filter our new experience based on our old experiences, and that keeps us from letting in new information. So a lot of people say, oh, I agree with this, and I'll do that because it makes sense. But I want you to take it one step further, and I don't want you to do it because you believe it. I want you to do it because you understand it. And I want you to be open-minded to listen a little bit broader to the things that you haven't adopted yet, so that once you understand them, maybe you'll be more apt to incorporate them. Also, a lot of people and a lot of teachers and a lot of books and a lot of videos, they have a very narrow focus. And that's good to a point, but it's a problem to a large extent. Some people would say, I believe in nutrition. I read a book or I heard about someone who changed something and they felt a whole lot better. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop eating junk food and processed food. I'm going to eat better food, and that'll be it. So is that person going to be better off? Absolutely every time. Because if you give the body more of quality things it's looking for and you give it less of what it doesn't need and that interferes, you will always be better off. You will always be moving toward health if you do that. Would you have visible results? Well, maybe, maybe not. Maybe you haven't done enough. Maybe you haven't done it long enough. Maybe it'll show up 6 months later. And it's kind of irrelevant if you get any results yet. If you understand that you're doing something that your body is being helped with, then you will always be better off. It's like a plant. It's always going to be better off with some water than no water. But water may not be enough because it also needs some sunshine. So other people might say, I believe in exercise, that I don't buy into all this nutrition. I think you can eat whatever you want. I'm just going to exercise as much as possible. And is that person going to be better off? Yes. Not if they do it to excess, but in moderation. The body has to have movement. It is not optional. It is a human requirement. Your physiology cannot be expressed optimally without regular movement. So if you move as opposed to don't move, you will always be better off. You will always be moving toward health. Will you have visible results yet? Same thing. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it takes longer. Maybe it'll show up down the road. Maybe you need to do something else also. And a third person might read a book on meditation and say, I believe in meditation. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus all my effort on that because I believe in mind-body interactions, and that's how I'm going to fix it. Will they be better off? Yes, because they will help their body move toward balance and toward better health. But what we have to start understanding is the difference between necessary and sufficient. The body has emotional requirement, it has nutritional chemical requirements, it has structural mechanical requirements. Those are necessary, so doing one is a good thing, but doing one may not be sufficient, and you may also need to do it for a longer period of time. This is why it's so important to understand what the body is looking for, because too many people, they try one thing for a week. And even though they're moving in the right direction, they didn't understand why they were doing it, so they lost interest before it ever had any effect. So I want to show you the bigger picture of what you can do every day. That's what the video is about. Do this every day to lose weight fast and to lose belly fat fast. But then we also have to understand and remember that what does fast mean? Well, it just means faster than no change, because a lot of people have done yo-yo dieting for so many years. They lost some weight, they gained some weight, and they've done this for 10, 20, 30 years. And it worked while they were in their 30s and 40s, but then their bodies just became so clogged up and so stubborn that nothing happened anymore. So in their 50s and 60s, now it seems like it doesn't matter what they do, nothing happens. So any change is faster than no change. And also, we want to keep in mind that we want to sustain it long term and we want the body to be healthy. So we can always stress the body. We can always do extreme things for a short period of time. And there may be some reason for that, like a longer fast is fine. But we have to find a lifestyle that we can sustain. So losing weight fast means as fast as possible to sustain long-term healthy changes. So I don't care if someone else loses 60 pounds in 3 months. That's totally irrelevant for what's going to happen to you. You have to relate it to yourself and understand the variables and play around with them. But what I do want to show you is how you can take it to the next level, because these different aspects of health are synergistic. That if someone can get benefit by meditating, working on their emotional aspect, and another person can get some improvement by working on their diet, and another person can get improvement with exercise, what if you did all of them? Because they are all requirements. Now here's the big one. Are you ready? Here is the cause of everything as it relates to health. The cause of every health problem is toxicity, deficiency, stress, and degeneration. So we'll expand on those in a second here. But basically, whenever you suffer from some of this, when some of this compromises your health, you have a reduction in homeostasis. You have a lessened ability of your body to process information correctly and to return all metabolic processes and every homeostatic variable back to balance, right? So this is, homeostasis is health. Your body always tries to return to homeostasis. And this is just another word for imbalance. Okay, balance is good, imbalance is bad. Harmony is good. Peace and harmony is good. Disharmony is bad. Function is when everything is working the way it's supposed to. Dysfunction means it's not working. And dis-ease. Ease is when you have peace and harmony, and dis-ease when you lost it. So these are different words for the exact same thing, but I wanted to elaborate on that to really give you an idea of what health is. And then when you no longer have ease and it turns to dis-ease, now you start having symptoms and you have suffering and you have things like metabolic poor health and visceral fat as well. So think about this for a second. The only thing that people suffer from is that something isn't working right. Whether you have a shoulder pain or a headache or low energy or you can't sleep or you can't digest food, it means something isn't working right. And why isn't it working right? Because some degree of toxicity, deficiency, stress, and degeneration. Toxicity means that there's too much of something your body can't handle. Metals, chemicals, pesticides, sugar, fructose, food additives, stress, etc. Deficiency means that there's something your body has to have. It's required for your body to function, but you're not providing it in sufficient quantity. So those are essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, vitamins, minerals, enzymes, and so forth. Stress is when your body is in a different state. So when you're relaxed, your body is in homeostasis. It's balancing its resources. But when you're stressed, when you have a stress response, your body focuses less on your vital organs and more on the external environment. So when you're focusing your resources on vital organs, now you can work on digestion and immune function and reproduction and DNA repair and healing. But when you have a stress response, your body shifts its priorities. It shifts the resources away from those vital organs and it puts it on the outside world to defend you against a real or imagined danger. That's why stress is so devastating, because you no longer have access to your healing power. And degeneration simply means use it or lose it. Every cell in your body is there for a reason. It has a purpose. If you do something that puts that cell to work, you're fulfilling the purpose of that cell, and the cell lives another day, and when it wears out, the body makes another one. But if you don't use it, there's no reason for the body to make another one, and that cell is going to wear out and not be replaced. That's called degeneration or atrophy. So most of the questions I get is for people asking, can you do a video on turmeric, or can you do a video on ashwagandha, or is garlic good for this? Those are the wrong questions, because what we need to ask is questions about toxicity. Are we toxic with something? Are we deficient in something? Are we stressed? Are we degenerating? So when people ask about turmeric or ashwagandha, they're asking, can I take this for something? And there are some benefits to thousands of different substances, but the question to ask is, does this provide something that my body needs to have in the long run? Or in the short term, can it help maybe dampen some inflammation or something like that? But in that sense, it's more of a safe drug. It's not really a nutrient. It's not something the body is looking for. So we want to focus more and more on the basics of handling the root cause. So what do we need to do to lose that belly fat and that weight once and for all? What is it? So we need to reduce insulin resistance and cortisol and fatty liver. We need to reduce stress, and we need to increase brain activation, because a strong brain makes everything work better. So basically, we want to stack the deck. Just like I hinted before, you don't want to do just one thing. You want to address the problem. You want to hit the issue with as many things as you have in your artillery. So you want to eat better, feel better, and move better, not one or the other. And this is how your body can get to homeostasis, can get to health and harmony in the long run. And most people just ask the question, what do I need to do? Give me the quick list. And that list is useless, because if you don't understand what it means, if you don't own the concept and the context to put that in, it is useless, because in 5 minutes you're going to find someone who says something different, and now you're all confused and you do nothing. So first we want to ask what, but then we want to understand the mechanism and get the why and the how. And once we're armed with all of those, that's when we're going to make some changes and stick to them. So first you want to eat shorter, and then you want to eat less. Now here's the problem. People focus on this only, and they associate it with deprivation. And when they hear eat less, now they think, oh, I'm going on a diet. I'm going to do something for 30 days or 60 days or 6 months. And they think their meals are going to look like this. And this is called deprivation. It's called suffering. It's not sustainable in the long run, and that's why people fail. So yes, you absolutely have to eat less, but it doesn't have to feel like you're eating less. And there are macros. That stands for macronutrients. That's where you get your calories, the fat, protein, and carbohydrate. And assuming you get about 20% from protein, because they're going to serve mostly as building blocks, then the rest is 80%. That means the fuel from fat and carbohydrate should make up 80%. Now, some people think that you should eat low fat. Other people say you should eat low carb. And here's the interesting thing. Either way works pretty well, at least short term. Here's the problem. If you eat low fat, that means you're going to eat high carb. So if you eat 10% calories from fat, you're going to eat 70% from carbohydrate. And then what happens is you're going to have very high insulin levels. You're going to have chronically high insulin levels, and you get hungry because insulin is a storage hormone, and as soon as the insulin is done stashing away the food, now you're ready to eat again. Whereas if you eat 10% carb and 70% fat, you get the same 80% for fuel, but the fat does not trigger insulin. So now you have a much more even blood sugar level, you have a much more even fuel supply. It's like you throw a log on the fire instead of throwing gasoline on the fire. It burns slower and it lasts longer. As a result, you have less hunger. So it's your choice, right? You have to eat less, but do you want to be more hungry or less hungry? The other thing a lot of these low-fat proponents don't realize is that carbohydrates turn to fat. They have a fat phobia. They've heard all these things about fat, that it's bad in some way, and they look at their bodies and they don't want the fat on their bodies, and they hear about blood fats and they don't want it in their blood. But they don't realize that when you eat carbohydrate, you can store a little bit and all the rest has to be turned into fat because it can't stay in the bloodstream. Blood sugar is dangerous and you can only store so much. So if you keep piling on the carbohydrates, it will turn to fat. But before it turns to fat, it has triggered a bunch of insulin that makes you hungry and creates all sorts of metabolic health issues. So if you do the low carb, high fat, also called LCHF, and the strictest version of that is called keto, where you eat very, very low carbohydrates. So low carb to me is maybe 10-15% of calories from carbohydrates. And with keto, you probably want to get down to like 5% of calories from carbohydrate. But what that does, like we said, is fat does not trigger insulin. So if you eat 10% carbs and 70% fat, there's very little in that food to trigger insulin. And if insulin stays down, your energy production is much, much more steady and you don't get hungry. That is the difference. Too many people focus on eating less and the calories and how many meals and all that. But what really matters is what is your feeding window and how much insulin are you producing, because long term that's going to determine your hunger levels. So you do have to eat less. There is no argument there, but you want to make it easy for yourself because the easier it is, the more sustainable it is, and that is like improving the odds in your favor. I even have people telling me that, no, you're wrong. You don't have to eat less because I don't think I do. I'm eating keto and I'm losing all this weight and I'm always full. But the whole point is that they are eating less, but it's so easy because they're stabilizing their whole metabolism that it's so easy they don't even realize they're eating less. And that is how it's sustainable. Now, as humans, we like to label things. We like to categorize things. We like to put some things in the emotional box and some in the structural box and some in the chemical. But that's just for us to be able to converse about it, to have a conversation. In reality, there is so much overlap that all of these affect each other that we can't really separate them out. That's in stark contrast to when they do research. When they do research, they have kind of a sequential, linear way of thinking. And what they're thinking is, let's try to change one variable. Let's try to control as much as we can of the variables and change one, and that's the one that we're studying. And that makes sense in that kind of thinking, and I'm not opposed to that. That's great. However, when it comes to you, when it comes to your reality, and how things work in biology, in living systems, then things are different because we are multifactorial. There's nothing about us that's linear. You can change the emotional in 1,000 different ways, and that's going to affect the structural, and that's going to affect the chemical. So these are all interrelated. And that's why you want to let the researchers change one variable at a time. But if you want the most and the best possible impact on your situation, then you do it all. You start working on the emotional, the structural, and the chemical all together. That's how you're going to get out of that plateau, and that's how you're going to start moving your body toward homeostasis in every way. Next thing you want to do every day to lose belly fat and weight is exercise. And it's not what you hear all the time. It's not about burning calories. So let's talk about this. Does exercise help with insulin resistance? It is pretty effective in preventing type 2 diabetes from developing. It is not very effective in reversing it once it's established, and here's why. Most of type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance is about the liver and a fatty liver. So NAFLD stands for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because traditionally most fatty liver was caused by alcohol. But in recent years, and especially in young people, the vast majority of fatty liver is from sugar and fructose, so they call that non-alcoholic fatty liver. So when you exercise, you're not really going to affect that fatty liver because you have two compartments where you store energy in the body. You have the liver that has its stores of fat and glucose, and you have the muscles that has its stores of fat and glucose, and then of course you have all the fat, the adipose tissue in the body. But when you exercise, you primarily start using up the glucose and the fat in the muscle. You're not really going to touch the fat or glucose in the liver. And the liver is holding on, it's earmarking this glucose primarily for the brain. Because the brain has to have a certain amount of glucose. When we fast and go keto, it can use a lot of ketones, but it always has to have some glucose, and when that runs low, then it's the liver that disperses that blood sugar on a regular basis. So exercise is not very powerful in reversing a fatty liver, but it's not completely useless either because it will use up some energy. So you're using up some substrate from the energy pool in the body, if you will. And if you're activating the muscles and they use up some of the glucose and fat, then the muscles will be available to absorb some of the fuel from the rest of the body. And that will make it less likely that the things you eat turn into fat in the liver. But it's not going to do much to reverse it. And when you do exercise, you want to make sure that it burns as much fat as possible and as little carbohydrate as possible. So how do you do that? It's called aerobic exercise. Aerobic means with air. And then you're going to keep your cortisol levels low. Cortisol is a stress hormone that raises blood sugar and therefore also raises insulin. So cortisol promotes insulin resistance and belly fat and a fatty liver. So we want to burn fat and we want to keep cortisol to a minimum. Anytime that we get into anaerobic, meaning without air, now cortisol goes up. And why is this? Because just like a fire, when you're burning logs in a fire, it's the oxygen that's fueling that fire. And if you can get more oxygen into the fire, it's going to burn hotter. Your cells are the same way. You have your bloodstream deliver oxygen to the cells, and in the cells you have mitochondria that fully burn that fuel, the fat and the carbohydrate, into energy and water and carbon dioxide. And as you breathe a little faster, you're providing more oxygen for the fire in your cells. And you still breathe nice and calm. You breathe slow, steady breaths, and they go a little bit faster up to your aerobic threshold. That is when your supplying as much oxygen as your cells can use to fully oxidize the fuel, the carb and the fat. But once you go a little bit higher, once your energy requirements are just a little bit higher than that aerobic threshold, now you've moved into anaerobic. So that means your body is demanding more energy than you can provide oxygen for. And now what happens is you go into air hunger. You start huffing and puffing. You start panting. You start breathing significantly faster. It's not a controlled, steady breath anymore. And now once you start huffing and puffing, once you have air hunger, now your cortisol levels go up. Why is that? Because the only thing that you can derive energy from without oxygen is glucose. So now you start splitting glucose molecules straight down the middle to get some emergency energy. As long as you're breathing nice and slow, even if they're deep breaths, you are in aerobic metabolism and you can burn fat or carbohydrate. But once you start huffing and puffing, you can only burn carbohydrate. So what that means is you want to spend as much time as you can in aerobic training, because not only are you burning mostly fat there, but what happens once you go into anaerobic and your muscles use up all that glucose, now you get a shortage of glucose. You used it all up. And what happens is you're going to have to replace those lost carbs later on. Because if you used up a bunch of carbs and you're trying to eat low carb, then you're actually going to get cravings and you get more hunger to make up for it. But even though exercise has a limited benefit for reversing fatty liver, I am still 100% for exercise. You have to do it on a regular basis, several times a week, because exercise does so much more. And here's what it really does. Exercise activates the brain. Exercise, when you move, you are stretching muscles and you're moving mechanoreceptors in your joints. And those two pieces of information is the vast majority of signals that stimulate the brain, that basically keep the brain alive. When you go to the gym and you work with a dumbbell, you're putting tension on a muscle. So you're stimulating that muscle to stay healthy and to grow. The brain gets stimulated by signals from muscle spindles and joint mechanoreceptors. So just like you work out a muscle, you work out your brain by moving your body through 3 dimensions against gravity. And why is that so significant? Because when you increase your brain activity, it's like you're turning up the dimmer on a light bulb, and the brighter your brain burns, the more it can inhibit things, the more it can control and balance out things that needs dampening. So there's something called the IML, which stands for intermediolateral cell column. Don't worry about the name. I just put this in here so you don't think I'm making this stuff up. This is your spinal cord, and this is half of your spinal cord. Right here in the green area is called the lateral horn, and this is where your stress response cell bodies live. So anytime you have a stress response, then this area reacts before that information even gets to the brain, because you have to have a split-second reaction time. Whenever something endangers you in your environment, you have to have a stress response first, and then your brain is informed to see if it's a real threat or if it's something that we can dampen a little bit. So that's a lot of what the brain does, is to dampen, to inhibit those stress responses. And once we understand all the steps, we can see how important this would be, because the IML is responsible for stress responses, for adrenal activation. Your adrenal glands make the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, but it also helps regulate minerals and things like that. So as your adrenals get tired, then you lose some of your ability to regulate minerals as well. Your adrenals are responsible for cortisol, and when cortisol goes up, blood sugar goes up. When blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up. So simply by improving brain activation, not burning calories, not any other aspect of exercise, just the movement to activate the brain, we are improving all of these different aspects. So that's a huge influence on stress responses, on health and insulin resistance. Now, if we're dealing with belly fat, we need to understand a few things. It is strongly associated with a fatty liver. They pretty much go hand in hand, and they also relate to insulin and cortisol, chronic elevated levels of insulin and cortisol. And the reason that situation developed in the first place is that we placed too much of a burden on the liver. The liver is supposed to handle certain things, but excess of other things is just too much. And these things are glucose, fructose, and alcohol, in that order. Alcohol is the worst. So glucose is not nearly as terrible as the other two. Glucose, that's rice and potatoes and grain and so forth, starchy things. And the reason it's not so bad is that glucose can be metabolized by every cell in the body. So only about 15-20% or so goes through the liver when it comes to glucose. And that's why you could eat rice and bread if you're reasonably active and you only eat 3 meals a day and you have an active lifestyle, then you can probably go 30, 40, 50 years and never develop any metabolic problems. Some people would, but most would not. However, once you add fructose or alcohol to the equation, fructose and alcohol can only be processed through the liver. So instead of 20%, now we're talking 100% basically goes through the liver, so a small amount still has the potential of overwhelming the liver. And that's why a lot of traditional populations who lived off a lot of rice and grain did well as long as they stuck with starch, with glucose. But as soon as they added sugar, as long as they added glucose and fructose, which is table sugar, now those problems, the diabetes, the metabolic problems, started skyrocketing. And most people know not to overdo alcohol. We don't give alcohol to our toddlers. We restrict it in many different ways, but we haven't really restricted fructose. We've had all sorts of warnings about fat, but fructose is the real killer. And it really hurts me when I see pictures like this, because it is so common today with type 2 diabetes in preteens. That used to be a disease called adult onset type 2 diabetes or adult onset diabetes. And kids never got it because it took 40, 50, 60 years to develop. But when you feed them like this, now you can have a type 2 diabetic as a 5-year-old. Another thing worth mentioning is sleep, because if you sleep well, then you have less stress, and it's also associated with lower levels of cortisol. When you don't sleep enough, when you have poor quality sleep, you only sleep a few hours, then stress levels go up and cortisol levels go up. And again, that has a detrimental effect on your metabolic health. And now for the emotional aspects. I think a lot of people sort of start with changing the way they eat. And then some people add some exercise to it. But very few people, I think, do enough consistently or understand how profound the emotional aspect can be. And the best way that I know to create relaxation and peace is called meditation. You can start with a breathing exercise and then sort of learn how to get a little bit deeper and deeper. But there's nothing strange or spiritual about it. Meditation is just a way to start going deeper inside and turning off all that noise in the background, finding a deeper level within yourself. And when you do that, now you're activating your frontal lobe, because in order to get some peace in your head, you have to turn off all of the distracting thoughts. So you're actually increasing frontal lobe activity when you meditate. And what that does, it reduces stress, it increases relaxation, it can help improve sleep, and it improves healing. So we talked about stress and a stress response being a sympathetic activation. So your body tries to get balanced between your sympathetic and your parasympathetic. But anytime you have stress, now you have the stress response, your sympathetic reallocates your resources. So it takes them away from your healing organs and it defends you against the outside world. So the inside, that's the parasympathetic. And that's things like digestion and immune system and reproductive function and healing. So basically, anytime you have stress responses, whether you're aware of them or whether it's against something real or imagined, anytime you have a stress response, you get tense, of course, you lose some relaxation, but you're also interfering with digestion and healing and immune function. So by learning a method just to balance out your stress responses, if that's all you do, you've already improved all of these different things. And one more thing that can create a stubborn weight situation is if you have a hypothyroid, if you have a slow thyroid. And most thyroid problems, especially in the Western world, are an autoimmune condition. And autoimmune has to do a lot with digestion. And if your digestion is off, that is usually because your stress levels are too high. So again, we see the loop closing. There's so many different things that are related, that these are all these bonuses that you get. You're just setting out to lose some belly fat and some weight. But if you do it right and you do it long term and you address the root causes, you'll find all these different things get better along the way. And then of course I wanted to mention again the exercise, because when you exercise, you improve your brain function, which can help reduce stress. So again, we separate out the emotional and the chemical and the structural, but there's so much overlap. And there's also obviously good nutrition. If you stabilize your blood sugar, if you get enough essential fatty acids and good minerals, that is also going to help your brain function and your emotional state. And therefore, every day, or at least most days, you want to do some movement. And it doesn't have to be exercise or go into the gym. You just have to move your body and create some signals to stimulate your brain. You also want to restrict your feeding window. You want to eat shorter, also known as intermittent fasting, so that you can be more in fat burning and less in fat storing. That also stabilizes your hunger, and it has much greater impact on weight loss than just counting calories. You want to do some form of meditation, and again, there's nothing mystical about it. It's just finding a place or a situation or a breathing pattern that gives you some peace, because when you practice that, now you're reinforcing those pathways and your nervous system gets better and better at automatically finding those relaxed states. You want to get some exercise, which means that in addition to just moving, you do something to get your heart rate up a little bit. And the higher you get your heart rate up, the shorter the duration, so that you don't create excess stress. Next, you want to eliminate processed foods. Up to 70% of the calories consumed in the United States are white flour, white sugar, and processed seed oils. You want to turn that down to 0, or at least under 10%, because it's garbage, and you want to get 90% or more from real food, from unprocessed things of a variety, I recommend you stay away from grains as much as possible. So meat, fish, vegetables, nuts, and seeds are your go-to. And you want to allocate enough time to get some proper sleep. Some people have trouble sleeping because they're stressed, they're inflamed for whatever reason. But if you start applying all of these different things, if you do the movement, if you stabilize your blood sugar, if you reduce the stress, if you eat real food, then you'll find that there's a trickle-down effect also to sleep. So if you just allocate enough time, then you'll probably find that you start sleeping better as well. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.